Karen always talked about the community, like it was a kingdom and she was the crown. The first time she saw me down by the lake,
You are trespassing. You cannot install that fence on my property. I demand you stop this instant.
Ma'am, if you look at the survey papers, this is the established boundary line.
didn't even introduce herself. She just pointed at the ground with her clipboard and said, "That's HOA property." I told her the truth. The lake and the strip of land beside it were mine, bought fair and square from the county. She laughed like I'd told a joke. "Sweetheart," she said, "the HOA has controlled this shoreline for years." That was the moment I realized what kind of neighbor I'd inherited. She didn't see property lines. She saw borders she could erase with confidence and paperwork. Every time I drove down to the water, she'd appear, snapping pictures, muttering about bylaws, telling anyone who'd listen that I was ruining the view. I didn't yell. I didn't argue. I just went home, poured a drink, and opened the property survey again. Every inch was legal. Every post, every foot of soil. And right there, running diagonally through her pristine backyard, was the real boundary she'd never bothered to check. I sat there, staring at the lines on the map, and something inside me clicked. She'd spent months trying to control what wasn't hers, so I decided to give her a boundary she couldn't ignore. The next morning, I called the fencing company. When the truck from the fencing company rumbled down the gravel road, every curtain in the cul-de-sac twitched. The lake shimmered behind the houses like it knew a storm was coming. Karen stood at the edge of her yard in a sun visor and pearls, arms folded tight, the way people stand when they think posture is authority. She didn't shout at first. She watched. Me, the surveyor, and two guys unloading cedar panels. Her lips pursed so hard they almost disappeared. Then, when the first post hole went in, she finally marched over. "You can't put that there," she snapped. I handed her a copy of T, a property survey, laminated and highlighted. "Pretty sure I can." Her eyes scanned the paper, then flicked back up at me. "This is wrong. That line's never been here." "That line's been here since 1954, I said. "Your builder just ignored it." She looked like she might combust on the spot. Behind her, two of her HOA loyalists hovered with their phones out, filming, whispering. One of them said, "Karen, call legal." The other nodded like they were invoking some divine ordinance. I kept my tone even. "The fence will stop 10 feet from the water line. That's the law. Everything else is private land." "You're destroying community aesthetics," she said, as if beauty was something she owned. "Ma'am," the foreman cut in, polite but tired, "we're just following the permit." That word, permit, hit her like holy water on a demon. She hissed, spun on her heel, and stormed off toward her house. By noon, the first stretch of fence was up. Cedar slats, straight as a sermon. Karen came back with her phone pressed to her ear, yelling something about city zoning violations. I could hear the dispatcher's tone from where I stood, calm, unimpressed. She hung up and glared at me like I'd taken oxygen out of the air. I smiled. "You can call whoever you want. The line doesn't move." The fence grew, foot by foot, like a quiet declaration. Each post was a fact driven into the ground. By the time the sun set, the last panel cut diagonally through her manicured lawn, right up to the edge of her hydrangeas. The lake caught the evening light, golden and still. She stood there after the workers left, staring at that cedar wall as if it had insulted her bloodline. Her husband appeared on the porch, looked once, muttered something that sounded like, "Just drop it," and went back inside. She didn't move. When night fell, I sat by the water with a beer, listening to the frogs and the faint hum of the fence settling into the soil. I thought about how quiet power really is, how satisfying it feels when truth sits heavy and undeniable in front of you. At dawn, I found the first sign of her retaliation, an anonymous HOA violation notice taped to my mailbox, accusing me of unauthorized modifications visible from community property. No signature, of course, just the smug echo of bureaucracy. I laughed. The fence wasn't even visible from the main road. She'd had to sneak down the slope to plant that notice. The next morning, I taped my own laminated copy of the county survey right below it, marked in red, "Property line confirmed." That's when I realized this wasn't going to be a fight over land anymore. It was going to be a fight over control. And Karen didn't know it yet, but I had far more patience than she had power. The next week felt like living under a microscope. Every morning my phone buzzed with new HOA notices: improper landscaping, fence color not pre-approved, obstruction of community view. Each one came sealed in a white envelope printed on official letterhead, signed by the board. The board, of course, being Karen and her two retired disciples who spent their afternoons policing bird feeders. Emma, my fiancée, read the third one aloud at breakfast and snorted. "Fence color not pre-approved? It's wood, it's the color of trees." "That's illegal wood, apparently," I said, flipping another notice onto the stack. "Natural cedar must offend their HOA palate." She smiled into her coffee. "You're enjoying this way too much." "I'm an engineer," I said. "We thrive on building things that irritate the wrong people." By the fourth notice, I stopped counting. She was trying to bury me in paper cuts, small fines, threats of community action, a letter demanding I appear before the board to resolve ongoing hostility. It was all noise, all meant to get under my skin. It almost worked, until I found her mistake. Buried in one of those letters was a scanned copy of an outdated zoning map. I recognized it instant. It was missing the 2012 boundary amendment that moved the HOA limit 20 feet back from the lake. The same amendment that gave me the legal right to build my fence exactly where it stood. I printed out both maps, the old and the new, and highlighted the differences. Then I made a few extra copies for my neighbors, because if Karen was harassing me, odds were she was doing it to them too. That evening, I went door to door, just talking. Casual. Friendly. Mrs. Patel, 2 houses down, told me Karen had fined her $50 for unsightly mailbox stickers. The retired couple next to her had been cited for having non-compliant garden stones. Everyone had a story. Everyone was angry. But nobody wanted to challenge her alone. So I gave them something better than anger: proof. "She's enforcing rules from an outdated charter," I told them. "Half of what she's threatening you with isn't even legal." By the weekend, half the street was buzzing. Someone made a group chat. Someone else printed my maps. The HOA that once scared everyone into silence had just been handed its first dose of collective confidence. Karen noticed. You could tell by how often she patrolled. Every few hours, the little golf cart would glide past my fence, the sound of its electric whine cutting through the air like a mosquito. She'd slow down, pretend to check something on her clipboard, and glare at the cedar panels like they'd betrayed her. On Sunday morning, I was out by the lake fixing a loose post when she finally cracked. She parked her cart right at the boundary and called out, "You know this isn't over, right? The board will have you take that down." I looked up, wiping sweat from my neck. "Karen, the board is you." "Exactly," she said, as if she'd just proven something profound. I smiled. "And the county is me." That shut her up for a moment. I handed her a copy of the zoning amendment, the same one she'd conveniently ignored. "You've been fining people with outdated maps. That's fraud. I'd suggest you stop before someone reports it." Her jaw clenched. "You're bluffing." "Try me," I said, and walked away. That night, she sent an email to the neighborhood calling me a disruptive element threatening community cohesion. It was full of long words and empty threats. She CC'd the whole mailing list. I replied to all with 2 attachments: the old map and the new one. No text. Just facts. The next morning, my inbox exploded with thank yous and screenshots of neighbors' refunds. Karen's grip was slipping, and she knew it. So she did what every petty tyrant does when they lose control. She tried to make it personal. On Tuesday, I came home to find my dock flooded. The water line was up at least 6 inches higher than normal, and the hose trailing from Karen's backyard into the lake told me exactly how. She'd been siphoning water to her own garden and forgotten to close the valve. I turned it off, took a photo, and went back inside. No confrontation. No yelling. Because at that point, she wasn't fighting for land anymore. She was fighting the humiliation of realizing she'd lost. By the middle of August, Karen's crusade had turned into a slow-motion collapse. The more she tried to control the narrative, the worse she made herself look. Every neighbor she'd ever find now had receipts, screenshots, and a growing taste for rebellion. The HOA queen, as Buddy started calling her, was ruling over a mutiny. The board meetings used to be a formality, people nodding while Karen read from her clipboard like she was delivering commandments. But the next one was different. You could feel it in the air before it even started. The room buzzed, the folding chairs scraped, and there were more people there than I'd ever seen. Emma and I stood near the back. She leaned close and whispered, "You sure about this?" I nodded. It's not revenge. It's record correction. Karen came in 10 minutes late, as if to remind everyone time belonged to her. She wore a navy blazer despite the heat, and held a binder so thick it could have doubled as armor. "Let's begin," she said, in that clipped tone she used when she wanted to sound professional. "We have several community violations to address." "Actually," said Mrs. Patel from the front row, "we need to talk about yours." The room shifted. 100 years of suburban politeness cracked in a single second. Karen blinked, confused, then defensive. "Excuse me?" I stepped forward. "You've been using outdated maps, Karen. You've been fining people for things that aren't violations, and you've ignored every request for documentation. That's abuse of authority." Buddy wheeled out a small projector, his idea. He plugged in his laptop and, in 2 clicks, threw the county amendment up on the wall for everyone to see. There it was. The 2012 revision that redrew the lake boundaries and restricted HOA jurisdiction. The same line that sliced through her property like poetic geometry. The room went dead quiet. Someone coughed. Karen stared at the screen, eyes wide, jaw tightening by degrees. "That's fake," she said finally. It's public record," Emma cut in. "Filed with the county clerk. You can call them right now." Mrs. Patel stood. "I already did. They emailed me the document this morning." A murmur ran through the crowd. You could feel her empire disintegrating in real time. One man raised his hand. "Karen, did you know about this?" She hesitated, and that hesitation was louder than any confession. I was told." "By who?" someone else asked. Another pause. Longer this time. Her face flushed red, not from guilt but from being cornered. She slammed her binder shut hard enough to echo. "This meeting is over." "No," I said, calm but firm. "This meeting is finally starting." There it was, that small, dangerous moment when the balance of power flips and the tyrant realizes the crowd no longer fears her. The murmurs became questions. The questions became accusations. The projector light flickered against her face like a spotlight she couldn't escape. She gathered her things and walked out, but her authority stayed behind, bleeding into the carpet. Afterward, the board voted to suspend her pending an investigation. The motion passed unanimously. Someone suggested a community audit. Someone else seconded it. By the end of the night, the very system she'd used to dominate the neighborhood had turned against her. When Emma and I walked home, the sky above the lake was a mess of orange and violet. She reached for my hand. "You feel bad for her?" she asked quietly. "Not really," I said. "She built her throne out of other people's patience. Eventually, that runs out." The next morning, I found her standing at the fence line again. No clipboard this time, just her, staring at the water. Her makeup was smudged, her hair unbrushed. She looked smaller, like someone who'd woken up from a dream where she was still important. "You did this," she said. "No," I told her. "You just drew the wrong lines." She didn't respond. She turned and walked away slowly, her shoes sinking slightly into the damp earth, the fence shadow stretching across her yard like a boundary that finally meant something. After the meeting, the neighborhood changed. You could hear it in the way people greeted each other, lighter, almost relieved, like someone had opened a window in a stuffy room. For the first time since moving in, the lake didn't feel like a stage for one woman's authority. It felt like ours. Karen, though, didn't vanish. Her title was suspended, but her spite was fully employed. Every few days, she'd lurk near the shoreline pretending to walk her property. She'd take photos of my fence, my dock, my mailbox, anything she could still claim as an offense. Sometimes she'd shout across the water, "You're lowering property values!" I'd shout back, "Then sell!" It drove her insane that I wouldn't engage beyond humor. But she wasn't the only one losing control. Without her, the HOA started to fracture. The other two board members quit within a week, one citing unnecessary stress, the other because it's a volunteer position, not trench warfare. We held an emergency election. Buddy somehow ended up treasurer, Mrs. Patel became chair, and someone suggested we rename the group entirely. Maple Crest HOA was retired that night. Lake Collective was born. It sounded less like a regime, more like a book club, and that was the point. We decided to clean up the shared spaces, repaint the docks, and repair the benches Karen had neglected for years while citing imaginary fines. The lake finally looked alive again. Kids started swimming, families picnicked by the shore. Every time I saw it, I thought, this is what she claimed to protect, and what she ruined trying to own. Still, she tried. She sent one last letter, thick envelope, certified mail. The return address was her new P.O. box in town. Inside was a cease and desist order she'd drafted herself, full of bold text and fake legal phrases, trespass upon shared resource, unauthorized boundary enforcement, emotional damages. I almost admired the creativity. I dropped it straight into a folder labeled Karen Fiction, right next to her first complaint. Then, one rainy night, she made her final mistake. The storm hit hard, wind thrashing the lake, trees bowing low, rain hammering the new fence like drums. Around midnight, I saw flashlights outside. I pulled on a jacket, stepped onto the porch, and saw two figures by the fence line. One was a neighbor helping secure loose trash cans. The other was Karen, hood up, hair plastered to her face, trying to pull one of the cedar panels out of the ground. "Karen!" I shouted. "You want to add trespassing to your list?" She froze, caught mid-pry, water streaming down her sleeves. For a moment, she looked almost feral. Then she slipped. Her boot hit mud, she went down hard, and the board she'd been wrenching loose landed half in the lake. I ran down, half to help, half to make sure she didn't drown in her own pettiness. She pushed herself up, hands shaking, face twisted with fury. "You ruined everything," she spat. "This neighborhood was mine." Lightning flashed behind her, lighting the water white. I stood there, rain pouring down, and said quietly, "That's the problem, Karen. You think community means ownership." For a heartbeat, neither of us moved. Then she turned and stumbled back toward her house, soaked and silent, the fence standing tall behind. Hit her like a row of judges. By morning, she was gone. Word spread fast. Sold her house overnight to some out-of-state couple who hadn't heard the legend yet. The moving truck came, the golf cart disappeared, and just like that, the reign of Karen ended with a squeal of wet tires on asphalt. When I walked down to the water that evening, the sky was clear again. The lake was calm, reflecting the line of the fence that marked where patience ended and peace began. Emma joined me, resting her head against my shoulder. "So," she said, "think we'll ever have another Karen?" I smiled, watching the reflection of the sunset ripple across the fence line. "Probably," I said. "But now we know exactly where to draw the line." Autumn came early that year. The trees around the lake turned copper and gold, and every morning mist rolled across the water like smoke from a fire finally burned out. The fence, the one that had started everything, had settled deep into the soil, straight, silent, and unapologetic. Sometimes I'd catch myself just staring at it, not because of what it represented, but because of how it felt. Solid, real. Proof that sometimes the best way to win a fight is to stop moving and let the truth stand still. The neighborhood had transformed in small, quiet ways. Kids rode bikes down the cul-de-sac without someone timing how long they'd been on community pavement. Mailboxes were painted whatever color people liked. Buddy organized barbecues by the water every other weekend. Mrs. Patel kept meticulous notes, but now they were about garden club schedules instead of fines. The lake had become the heart of it all. The dock that once stood half-rotten now stretched clean and level into the calm water. We built a small fire pit by the shore. The laughter that used to stop when Karen's golf cart rolled by now carried across the lake like music. Every now and then we'd see her house. The new owners were young, a couple with a golden retriever and too many potted plants. They waved every time they passed, and I always waved back. No tension, no history, just neighbors. The kind we'd all wanted to be from the start. One afternoon, while I was repairing a loose step on the dock, Emma came down with 2 beers. She handed me one, looked at the fence line glinting in the distance, and said, "Do you ever think she'll come back?" I laughed softly. "If she does, I'll give her a tour. Show her what a real community looks like." Emma smiled. "You sound proud." "I am," I said. "Not because I built a fence, but because I didn't let her tear it down." The wind moved through the trees, carrying the faint creak of cedar and the smell of the lake. Across the water, the sunlight hit the boards in such a way that the whole thing looked like one clean stroke drawn across the earth, a signature in wood and patience. I remembered that first day she'd stood there, pointing at the ground, claiming the space as hers. I remembered the smirk, the orders, the threats. It all felt like a different lifetime now. Funny how people who shout the loudest always end up fading the fastest. When the sun began to dip, Emma leaned her head against my shoulder and said quietly, "You know, I think that fence did more than mark property." I looked at her, half smiling. "Yeah, it drew the line between what we own and what we'll never let anyone take again." The water shimmered gold. Somewhere in the distance, a loon called out across the lake, and for the first time since the day I'd moved in, there wasn't a single voice trying to claim it. Just wind, cedar, and the steady rhythm of peace that stays when pride finally leaves.